The night I stopped talking, nobody noticed. That is the thing about being invisible. The world keeps spinning. People keep laughing, and not a single person turns around to check if you are still breathing. I had been carrying my silence like a second skin for so long that even I forgot what my voice sounded like. And then 3 strangers walked up to me while I was falling apart on a park bench, and everything I thought I knew about safety shattered into something I could not name. This story will reach into your chest and pull something loose. Before we go any further, tap like, share this with someone who needs to feel something real today, and subscribe so you never walk into the next chapter alone. I was sitting on the east bench of Maplewood Park at 11:19 at night, which I knew because I had been watching the clock on my phone like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the earth. The tears were not dramatic. They did not pour. They just leaked, one by one, like a faucet someone forgot to turn off. My backpack was between my feet. My hoodie was pulled low over my face. I had nowhere to go. Not tonight. Not after what happened at the group home. And I was doing the math in my head of how many hours until the park gates locked and a security guard would tell me to leave. I did not hear them coming. I only knew they were there because the bench dipped on both sides of me at the exact same time. And then a third figure crouched down directly in front of me so that I could not look at the ground without looking at him. 3 boys. Identical faces. Dark hair, sharp eyes, broad shoulders, and matching gray hoodies that had a small gold crest stitched over the left chest pocket. They were big, the kind of big that usually made me want to disappear, but none of them reached for me. None of them made a sound. The one crouching in front of me just looked. Not at me like I was a problem. Not at me like I was something to feel sorry for. He looked at me like I was a person who was hurting, and that was a completely different thing. My name is Frederick. Frederick Calloway. I am 19 years old. I am an Omega in a world that treats that word like a warning label, and I have not spoken a single word out loud in 8 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. The one in front of me, the one crouching, slowly lifted both hands, palms out. An old gesture. A peace gesture. A I am not going to touch you gesture. Then he tapped his own chest twice and held up 3 fingers. I stared. He did it again. Chest tap. 3 fingers. Then he pointed at himself and his brothers on either side of me. I understood. 3. Us. Here. My hands were shaking. Not from cold. The August air was thick and warm, but I pulled one out of my hoodie pocket anyway. I held up 1 finger and pointed at myself. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. 1. You. We see you. The brother on my left. I could not tell them apart yet. Their faces were exact mirrors. Reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small spiral notebook and a black pen. He held it out to me with 2 hands. Like an offering. Like you might offer something to a frightened animal you did not want to startle. I looked at the notebook. I looked at him. I took it. The one in front of me, the crouching one, finally sat down on the grass so that we were closer to eye level. He pulled his own phone out and typed something, then turned the screen toward me. We live 2 blocks from here. Our dad runs a private shelter for displaced youth. No intake forms tonight. No questions you have to answer with words. You just have to nod yes or no. Are you okay right now, in terms of danger? I read it twice. Then I shook my head. No. He typed again. Are you in immediate danger right now, in this moment? I thought about it. The group home director had made it clear I was not welcome back. But he was not here. I shook my head slowly. No immediate danger. Just nowhere. He typed. Do you have somewhere safe to sleep tonight? I shook my head again. He turned the phone to his brothers. Something passed between the 3 of them. Not words, just a look. The kind of look that only exists between people who have known each other so long they have invented their own language. Then all 3 of them stood up. The one who had been on my right held out his hand, not to grab mine, just to gesture. This way. I did not move. The crouching one, who was now standing, typed one more thing and showed me the screen. You do not have to trust us. You do not have to come. But we will stay here with you until the park closes if you need us to. We are not going anywhere until you decide. I read that 3 times. 8 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Nobody had ever told me they would stay. I picked up my backpack. I stood up, and I followed 3 strangers into the dark. Their names were Christopher, Finn, and Colt. I learned this from the chore chart on the refrigerator in the kitchen of the townhouse they led me to, which had their names printed in 3 different colors, blue, green, and red, next to tasks like trash and dishes and weekly groceries. It was such a normal, ordinary thing, a chore chart. and it made me feel like maybe this place was real. Their father's name was Marcus Hale. He was a tall man with a gray streak in his black hair and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead when he came downstairs at midnight, clearly having been asleep. He looked at me, then at his sons, and he did not ask a single question. He just said, "There's a room at the end of the hall. Bathroom shared. Breakfast is at 7:30 if you want it. Nobody here is going to make you do anything tonight." Then he went back upstairs. I stood in the hallway holding my backpack, and I genuinely did not know what to do with that. Christopher. I had figured out Christopher was the crouching one, the one who typed on his phone, because he moved slightly different from his brothers, a little more deliberate, like every action was a choice he had thought about. Christopher pointed down the hall. Then he pulled out the small notebook his brother had given me earlier, which I was still holding, and gestured at it. "Keep it," his hand motion said. Finn, green on the chore chart, the one who had been on my left, gave me a thumbs up and a short nod that meant good night in the way that someone who respects silence knows how to say it. Colt, red on the chart, the one who had held out his hand in the park, gave me a small, lopsided grin that disappeared almost as fast as it appeared. Not a performance, just a flicker of genuine warmth. I walked to the room at the end of the hall. I sat on the edge of the bed. I opened the notebook. On the very first page, in handwriting that was already there, blue ink, careful letters, it read, "This notebook is yours. Nobody will read it without permission. Not even us." I closed it. I laid down on top of the covers with my backpack still on my back, the way I always slept when I was somewhere new, in case I needed to run. But I did not run that night. For the first time in a long time, I did not run. Morning came in through a window that had clean curtains, yellow, with small white dots, and for about 3 seconds I forgot where I was. Then I remembered, in the careful, locked-up part of me that had been built over years of group homes and temporary placements and adults who smiled before they disappointed you. That part of me went very still and watchful. I took my backpack off. I set it by the door. I went to the bathroom and washed my face and looked at my own reflection for a while. My eyes were still red from last night. I had a healing scratch on my jaw from where the group home director's clipboard had caught me when he slammed it on the table to make a point. It had not been a hit, technically. He would say that. He would say the clipboard fell. But I knew what a deliberate movement looked like, and so did my jaw. I had not written that in any report. Writing things in reports required talking to people, and I had learned that talking to people required trusting them, and trusting people required a belief that they would not use your words against you later. I had run out of that belief at the age of 15 when my last foster placement handed my private journal to the school counselor and said we think he might be a problem. The notebook was in my back pocket. Breakfast was at 7:30. I looked at the clock. 7:22. I picked up my backpack, walked down the hall, and sat at the kitchen table. All 3 of them were already there. Marcus Hale was at the stove. The kitchen smelled like eggs and coffee and something baked. Nobody stared at me. Christopher was reading something on his phone. Finn was drawing in a sketchbook. Colt was eating a piece of toast with an expression of deep personal satisfaction, like that toast was the best decision he had made all week. Marcus set a plate in front of me. Scrambled eggs, 2 pieces of wheat toast, orange slices on the side. He filled a glass of orange juice and slid it next to the plate. "Frederick," he said, not as a question, just as an acknowledgement. Like he already knew my name and was letting me know that he knew it. I pointed at the chore chart. He looked at it. He looked at me. I pulled out the notebook and wrote, "How did you know my name?" He sat down across from me with his coffee. "Christopher looked you up last night. Public records from county services. Not because we were prying, because if someone needed to file a missing persons report on you, we needed to know who to call. Your name was listed as a resident of the Greenfield Group Home." He paused. "We know the director there. We have had concerns about that facility for a while." I looked at the scratch on my jaw. He followed my eyes. His jaw tightened. Just slightly, the kind of tight that meant anger being very carefully held in place. But he did not say anything dramatic. He just reached into a drawer and put a small first aid kit on the table next to my plate. Finn, without looking up from his sketchbook, slid the kit closer to me. I used it. That was the morning of my first day in the Hale house. And if I had known then what was underneath it, the secrets, the danger, the truth about who these 3 boys actually were, I might have run. But I didn't know. Not yet. A week passed. Then 2. I fell into the rhythm of the Hale House the way you fall into a river current. Not because you chose to, but because the current was gentler than you expected, and your body was so tired of fighting that it just let go. Marcus ran a registered nonprofit called The Open Door. Officially, it provided transitional housing for displaced youth. Unofficially, from what I pieced together through observation, because I observed everything, silence made you a very good observer. It was more than that. Boys showed up, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone. Marcus would intake them, house them for weeks or months, and then they would move on to something more permanent, and Marcus would never talk about where they went. He treated every person's story like it was a private thing, not a file to be opened. I thought about asking. Then I thought about all the times I had asked questions and regretted it, and I wrote in my notebook instead. Christopher was the one who spent the most time with me in those first 2 weeks. Not in a hovering way. He did not follow me around or check on me every hour like I was a task to be completed. He just showed up in the same room. If I was in the kitchen, he would eventually appear and make tea and sit at the counter with whatever he was working on. If I was on the back porch in the evening, he would come out with 2 bottles of water and set one next to me without asking if I wanted it. He had figured out a system with me. He would type things on his phone and show me the screen. Short things, mostly. Good morning. It's going to rain later. Did you sleep okay? I would answer with the notebook or with gestures. Thumbs up. Thumbs down. A shrug. Once I drew a small sun in the notebook and held it up in answer to "How are you feeling today?" and he had looked at it for a long moment and then written back, "Same." Finn was different. Finn communicated through drawing. He would leave small sketches on the kitchen table, not portraits of me, never anything that would make me feel watched, just small scenes. A bird on a fence. A cup of coffee steaming. A cartoon of Colt making a face at the refrigerator. I realized after the 4th one that he was leaving them in places where I would find them first, and that each one was timed to something that had happened in the house that day. The bird appeared the morning after I had sat on the porch very still and watched a sparrow on the fence for almost 20 minutes. He had seen me. He had not said anything. He had just drawn it. Colt was the loud one. Loud in the way that people who understand quiet know how to be loud without being frightening. He made announcements to the room at large, not directed at me, but clearly meant for everyone. We are out of granola bars. This is a crisis. Someone left the back door open last night, and now there is a cricket in the bathroom. His name is Gerald, and he lives here now. I am making popcorn. The large bowl is available for sharing on a first-come, first-served basis. I had not smiled in a very long time. Gerald the cricket made me smile. It was small. It was quick. But Colt saw it, and his own grin broke open like something that had been waiting for permission, and then he looked away before I could feel embarrassed about it. That was the thing. All 3 of them had this way of seeing me without making me feel seen. Like they had practiced it. Like they understood, on some level I could not explain, that being noticed too directly felt like a spotlight being shined in a dark room. It did not feel like warmth. It felt like exposure. On the 15th day, Christopher showed me his phone. The message was longer than usual. You do not have to tell us anything about your past, but I want to tell you something about ours, because I think you are starting to wonder, and wondering without information is scarier than knowing. We are alphas. Triplet alphas, which is extremely rare. Our biological father, not Marcus, was someone powerful and not safe. Marcus is our uncle. He took us in when we were 11. We have been through our own version of not trusting anyone. We are not asking you to trust us. We are just asking you to know that when we sit near you, it is because we want to, not because we have to, not because of what you are. I read it 4 times. Then I pulled out my notebook. I wrote, "Why did you come to me in the park? You didn't know me." He read it. He thought about it. He typed back, "Finn saw you from the street. He said you looked like someone who needed someone to stay. He has a thing about that. He could always tell." I looked at Finn across the kitchen, who was apparently listening to music through one earbud and pretending not to have any awareness of this conversation. I wrote in my notebook, "I am a mute omega," in case you hadn't figured that out. Christopher typed back, "We figured it out on day 1. It does not change anything." I wrote, "It changes everything, everywhere else." He read that. He did not try to argue with it. He just wrote back, "Not here." Marcus called me into his office on a Tuesday. It was a small room lined with bookshelves and plants that were slightly overgrown in the friendly way that said they were loved but not fussed over. He had 2 mugs of tea on the desk and a legal pad and a pen. He did not open a file. He did not have a computer on the desk. He just had the legal pad, and when I sat down, he turned it toward me. I want to talk about your situation. Your options. You do not have to use your voice. Write everything down if that works better. Take as long as you need. I looked at the legal pad. I looked at him. Then I pulled out my notebook. I carried it everywhere now, the way other people carried their phones, and I wrote. The group home reported me as a runaway. There will be consequences. He nodded and wrote back on the legal pad. I have already been in contact with county services. We have applied for emergency guardianship while your case is reviewed. The director of Greenfield has been reported for the incident with the clipboard. There are 3 other boys who made similar reports in the same week. I sat with that. I wrote, is that why they came to you? The other boys. He wrote, some of them, yes. The open door works with county services as an official placement option. You would not be a runaway. You would be a placed youth, here voluntarily, with the right to leave. I read that twice. With the right to leave. Nobody had ever put it that way before. Every placement I had ever been in, they told you what you had to do. Nobody mentioned what you got to do. I wrote, how long? He wrote, as long as you need. I looked at my notebook for a long moment. The pages were more full now than when they gave it to me. Notes, sketches, things I had wanted to say and written down instead, because that was the only way they came out. I wrote, I want to stay. He read it. He nodded once, the same kind of nod that Christopher did, deliberate, like it meant something. All right, he said out loud. Then you stay. The first crack in the ordinary appeared on a Thursday evening in the 3rd week. I was in the back hallway when a car pulled up outside that made all 3 brothers stop what they were doing at the exact same moment. It was not a dramatic stop. There were no sharp gestures or quick movements. They just stilled, the way deer still when they hear something in the woods. Christopher was the first to move. He went to the front window and looked through the curtain without pulling it aside. Then he turned to Colt and made a hand signal I did not recognize. Colt went upstairs. Finn came to me, smoothly, without rushing, and pointed toward the back of the house. His face was calm, but his eyes were doing something else. Something alert and assessing. I followed him to the back porch. He closed the door behind us. Through the screen, I watched Christopher open the front door. 2 men were on the front step. I could not hear what they were saying. They were in regular clothes, not uniforms, but they stood the way that people who are used to being obeyed stand. Feet slightly apart, chin slightly up. One of them handed Christopher a card. Christopher looked at it. He said something. The men looked at each other. They left. Christopher closed the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he came to the back porch and held out his phone. Those are people connected to our biological father. They find us sometimes. It is handled. You are safe. I wrote, what do they want? He hesitated. That hesitation was the most I had ever seen any of them hesitate. He typed, not tonight. I promise we will explain. But not tonight. I looked at him for a long moment. He met my eyes and did not look away. I nodded. But something in me shifted. That careful, watchful part of me that had kept me alive through every bad placement and every adult who said trust me and then proved I should not. It shifted and woke up and started paying attention in a different way. Because I knew, with the certainty of someone who had been lied to before, that the Hale house had a secret. And the secret was bigger than a biological father. And it was coming closer. I found the room by accident. It was a Sunday, early morning, and Marcus had gone out before 7. The triplets were still asleep, or I thought they were. I was restless in the way I always got when something was coming that I could not name, and I had been walking the house quietly, which was a habit I had developed over years of needing to know where every exit was before I could feel calm enough to breathe. The hallway on the 2nd floor had 4 doors. 3 were bedrooms. The 4th, I had always assumed, was a storage closet. It was not a storage closet. It was not locked, or it had been, once, but whoever had locked it had not done it properly, and when I touched the handle it swung inward. And I stood in the doorway of a room that did not belong in a house that ran a youth shelter. There were 3 large boards on the wall, covered in photographs and maps and printed documents connected by color-coded string. There was a folding table in the center with laptops. Not 1, 3. All closed, all tagged with the same small gold crest I had noticed on the brothers' hoodies that first night. The walls were covered in handwritten notes. Some of them were in a code I could not read. Some were in plain English, and the plain English ones said things like VOS Network, Eastern Corridor, and follow the placement trail and Omega trafficking. Confirmed 7 cases, county level. I stood very still. Omega trafficking. I had heard that phrase before, spoken in hushed voices in group homes, the kind of thing older residents whispered about like a horror story. I had never believed it was real, or I had believed it was real the way you believe something terrible is real when it happens to other people, somewhere else, in a world you are not quite living in. 7 cases. County level. I looked at the photographs. I recognized one of them. It was the Greenfield Group Home Director. His name was typed below the photo in small red letters. Derek Shaw, confirmed recruiter. My vision went strange at the edges. I pressed one hand against the doorframe. Recruiter. Derek Shaw, who had slammed a clipboard on a table at me and told me I was a problem. Derek Shaw, who had been running Greenfield for 6 years. Derek Shaw, who had a very specific habit of sending certain residents. Always Omegas, always quiet, always the ones with no one to call, to what he called extended care placements that nobody ever questioned because nobody was paying close enough attention. Boys who disappeared. I had always told myself they had just moved on, aged out, found something better. I had told myself that because the other possibility was too big to look at directly. A hand landed on my shoulder. I spun around. It was Christopher. He was in pajamas. He had clearly just woken up, and his hair was in all directions. And he looked at me and then passed me into the room, and his face did something complicated. Not anger, not quite, but something close to grief that was mixed with resignation. He stepped back. He gave me space. He held out his phone. He had typed fast, without his usual careful deliberateness. I am sorry. We were going to tell you. We were waiting until we were sure you were stable enough to hear it without running. I looked at him. I pulled out my notebook. My hand was not entirely steady. I wrote, "Tell me everything." It took 2 hours. We sat in the kitchen, all 4 of us, Marcus included, who had come home and walked in without surprise, which meant Christopher had texted him, and they talked. Christopher typed on his phone and showed me. Marcus wrote on the legal pad. Finn drew a timeline that made the connections visual, and Colt, for the first time since I had met him, was not making jokes. This is what I learned. Marcus Hale was not just running a youth shelter. He had been running an undercover investigation for 3 years, working with a federal agency I had not heard of, tracking a network that recruited displaced Omega youth and moved them through a series of fake care placements across 4 states. The network was organized and patient. It worked because it targeted the exact kind of youth that systems lost track of, the ones with no family, the ones who were hard to reach, the ones whose disappearances looked like runaways on paper. Their biological father, the man those 2 men on the front step worked for, was named Garrett Hale. Garrett Hale was connected to the top of the network. Marcus's investigation was building toward him, slowly, carefully, in the way that you had to build something when the person you were building it against was powerful enough to make evidence disappear. The triplets were not just Marcus's nephews. They had been recruited into the investigation 2 years ago because they had resources Marcus did not. Specifically, they had access to Garrett Hale's circle through their identity as his sons. They were, in a term Colt finally said out loud in a flat voice, inside assets. They were 19-year-old boys doing undercover intelligence work because they were the only people close enough to a very dangerous man to get the information that would stop him. I sat with all of this. Then I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "Why are you telling me this? You didn't have to tell me this." Christopher read it. He looked at his brothers. He wrote back, "Because Derek Shaw recruited from Greenfield. Because we have been monitoring that facility for 8 months. Because when Finn saw you in that park and recognized what was happening to you, we realized that you had probably been targeted, and the only way to help you without putting you in more danger was to bring you here and keep you close until we could confirm whether you were safe." I read that. I read it again. I wrote, "Was I on his list?" There was a pause that was too long for it to be anything good. Marcus wrote on the legal pad, "Yes. Your name appeared in Shaw's communications 4 weeks ago. He had flagged you for what the network calls a soft transfer. That would have happened within the next 2 to 3 weeks if you had stayed at Greenfield." I sat there. 8 months of silence. 8 months of carrying myself through a world that felt tilted and wrong and too loud even when it was quiet. And I had not known. I had not known that the tilt had a cause, that the wrongness had a shape, that the thing chasing me through my own life had a name and an address and a file on a board in an upstairs room. I closed my notebook. I opened it again. I wrote one word. "Okay." Finn looked up from his timeline. Colt leaned forward. Marcus watched me. Christopher typed. Okay, meaning what? I wrote. Okay, meaning I know now. Okay, meaning I am not running. Okay, meaning, what do you need from me? Right here, in the middle of everything. If this story is doing something to you, do something for it. Subscribe to this channel and share this video. The next chapter is about to change everything. What they needed from me was, at first, nothing except to be present and safe, which I was told multiple times was enough. Marcus said it. Christopher typed it. Even Colt said it out loud at dinner one night, abruptly, into a silence that had been sitting there long enough to grow roots. You being here is not a burden. Nobody thinks that. Eat your pasta. I ate my pasta. But I had never been someone who could sit still while something needed to be done. That was the thing about being mute. People assumed that silence meant passivity. It did not. My mind was not quiet. It had never been quiet. It just expressed itself through other channels. And one of those channels turned out to be exceptionally useful in an investigation that relied heavily on documents, patterns, and connections that were easy to miss when you were too close to them. I started small. I asked Christopher, through the notebook, if I could look at the documents in the room. He talked to Marcus. Marcus said yes, with conditions. I could not access the digital records, only the physical boards, and I had to come to him or one of the triplets the moment I found something that felt significant. I found something on the third day. It was in the string map, the color-coded connections between names and locations. There was a cluster of red strings that all connected to a single location, a warehouse address in a part of the city I recognized, because it was 2 streets from the bus stop I had used for 6 months to get from Greenfield to the public library. I had walked past that warehouse every week. I had noticed, in the automatic way that silent people notice things, that there was always a different car parked outside it on Tuesday mornings. Always between 8 and 10 a.m. Always with the engine running. I wrote it in my notebook, the address, the car pattern, the timing, and I brought it to Christopher. He read it. He went very still in the Hale way. He typed, "How often did you notice this?" I wrote, "Every Tuesday for 6 months." He showed it to Marcus. Marcus looked at it for a long time. Then he made a phone call in the other room that lasted 45 minutes. When he came back out, something had shifted in the energy of the house. Subtle, but I felt it. He sat down across from me. He wrote on the legal pad, "That address just confirmed something we have been trying to verify for 5 months. What you noticed, the car pattern, the timing, it matches a data point we could not place. You found the connection we were missing." I looked at the legal pad. I wrote in my notebook, "What happens now?" He looked at me. There was something in his expression, careful, measured, but also something warmer underneath it. He wrote, "Now we move toward the end of this. And Frederick, thank you." I folded that page in the notebook. I did not know then that the end of the investigation was going to crack open something inside me that I had buried so deep I had forgotten it was there. I did not know that the silence I had built around myself, the silence I had worn like armor for 8 months, 2 weeks, and 22 days, was about to be tested in a way that no armor, no matter how thick, could fully survive. I did not know that in 3 days, someone would come to the Hale house who would make every careful wall I had built look like paper. But that is the thing about not knowing. It gives you 3 more days of something close to peace. His name was Dorian West. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon while Marcus was out and the triplets were at what they called a check-in, which I had figured out meant a meeting with their federal contact, and I was alone in the house for the first time since I had arrived. I had been on the back porch with my notebook, and I heard the front door, which had been left unlocked because Marcus had said he would be back within the hour, open and close. I went very still. Footsteps. Measured. Not Marcus, who had a slight unevenness in his gait from an old injury. Not any of the triplets, who I had memorized the way you memorize anything you need to know in case of emergency. Someone else. I pressed myself against the back wall of the house, next to the screen door, where I could see through the kitchen into the front hallway without being seen. The boy who had come in was about my age, maybe a year older, with pale blonde hair that was cut military clothes on the sides and longer on top, and he was wearing a jacket that had that same small gold crest on it that the triplets wore. He was looking around the kitchen with the expression of someone who had been here before and was checking to see what had changed. He opened the refrigerator. He took out an apple. He bit into it. And then he turned his head and looked directly through the kitchen and through the screen door and found my eyes. He did not startle. He did not drop the apple. He just looked at me with gray eyes that were very calm and very old for his face. And he said, "You must be Frederick." I stared at him. He said, "I am Dorian. Marcus is my legal guardian. I have been away for 3 months." He paused. "You can come in. I am not going to do anything alarming." I came in. Slowly, I sat at the kitchen table, and I put my notebook on the table between us, which was my way of saying this is how I talk, in case you did not know. He looked at it. He sat across from me. He said, "Christopher texted me about you. He said you were observant and you did not miss things. He said you had been at Greenfield." He paused. Something shifted in his expression, just slightly, like a window fogging. "I was at Greenfield 3 years ago, before Marcus found me." I looked at him. I pulled the notebook toward me and wrote, "Did you get out?" He read it. He said, "Obviously. I am sitting here." But his voice did the thing that voices do when they are making a joke in order to not say the other thing. Then he said, more quietly, "I got out 4 days before they were going to move me. Marcus intercepted. That is how the investigation started, with me." I wrote, "You are the first case." He nodded. "Just once. Quick." I wrote, "Are you okay?" He looked at that for a moment. The question clearly surprised him. Not the way questions surprised people who had never been asked, but the way questions surprised people who had learned not to expect them from strangers. He said, "Most days." I wrote, "Me too." He looked at that for a long time. Then something in his face, the careful, measured surface of it, shifted just enough that I could see underneath it. And what was underneath it was a person who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had gotten good at pretending it was not heavy. I recognized that. I recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting on something you wrote so long ago you forgot about it. We sat in the kitchen in silence, real silence, chosen silence, the comfortable kind, until Marcus came home 40 minutes later and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at us and said, "Ah, you've met." Dorian West turned out to be a lot of things I had not expected. He was funny, in a dry, sideways way that came out at moments when everything was too serious and he seemed to decide that somebody needed to puncture the tension. He was careful with people in the way that you are careful with things you have broken before and know how fragile they are. He was, I found out from Colt on the 3rd day after his arrival, also an Omega, and like me, he had spent years in systems that did not know how to handle what he was, so he had learned to handle it himself, which mostly meant burying it under layers of competence and composure. But the thing about Dorian, the thing that mattered in a way I did not have words for, was that he talked to me like I was going to answer. Not like I was going to write in my notebook, and he was going to wait for that. He talked to me the way people talk to someone in a conversation, pausing in the right places, not rushing to fill my silences, leaving space. And sometimes, in those spaces, I would write something, and he would read it and respond, and it felt, for the first time in 8 months, 2 weeks, and too many days to count, like talking. Not like talking used to feel, back when talking meant risk. Like talking felt before that, when it was just a way 2 people reached each other. One evening, a week after he arrived, we were on the back porch. The triplets were inside. Marcus was in his office. The sky was doing that thing where the last of the day goes orange and then purple at the edges, and it was the kind of evening that you wanted to say something about, but could not quite find the words for. Dorian said, "Do you remember what your voice sounds like?" I looked at him. He said, "I am not asking you to use it. I wondered whether you remembered." I pulled out my notebook. I wrote, "Sometimes, early in the morning, before I am fully awake, I will almost say something, and then I remember that I stopped." He read it. He said, "What made you stop?" I wrote, "Someone used my words against me. More than once. After a while it was just safer." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I understand that." I did not stop talking, but I stopped saying anything real, which is a different kind of mute. He looked at the purple edge of the sky. It is a long way back from that. I wrote, "Are you going back?" He looked at the notebook. He said, "I think so." Slowly. Then he looked at me. "Are you?" I thought about it. I wrote, "I don't know yet. But maybe." He nodded. Not like it was a small thing. Like it was the right answer. The night everything broke open was a Friday. I was asleep when it happened. I was brought back to consciousness by the sound of voices, real voices, urgent, downstairs, and by the feeling that the house had changed temperature in the way houses change temperature when something serious has entered them. I got up. I took my backpack, habit, and I went to the top of the stairs. Christopher was on the phone. Colt was at the front door looking out. Finn was at the window with his phone. Marcus was in the hallway with his jacket on, which meant he had come in from outside, not put it on to go out. Dorian appeared in the hallway below me. He looked up and found me at the top of the stairs. He said, quietly, "They moved the schedule up. The warehouse, the one you identified. There was activity tonight that was not supposed to happen for another week. Our federal contact thinks someone tipped them off that the investigation was getting close." I came down the stairs. Christopher ended his call. He looked at me, and then at Dorian, and then he typed fast and held up his phone. "We need to go to a secondary location. Marcus has a safe house. This is not because we are in immediate danger. It is a precaution. You and Dorian do not have to come with us if you would rather." I reached over and took his phone. I typed, "I am coming." He looked at me. Something in his expression, usually so deliberate and contained, went briefly, visibly warm. He took his phone back. He typed, "Okay, stay with Finn. Do not let go of his hand if things get loud." I looked at Finn. He held out his hand, not like I was a child, like he was a person who understood that loud meant something specific to me and was offering an anchor. I took his hand. We left the house in 2 cars, at 2-minute intervals, through the back alley. I was in the second car with Finn and Dorian. Finn drove. Dorian was in the passenger seat. I was in the back. None of us talked. The city went by outside the windows. Familiar streets, the park where they had found me, the bus stop I had used for 6 months, the 2 streets from the warehouse. We did not go near the warehouse. Finn took a different route, longer, and I understood that the longer route was the safer one. Dorian turned around in the passenger seat and looked at me. He said quietly, "How are you doing?" I held up one finger and made a small wobbling motion. "SOSO." He nodded. He turned back around. After a moment, he said, not to anyone in particular, just to the air, "We're going to be okay." I did not know if he was saying it to me or to himself, but I held on to it the same way I was holding on to Finn's hand. The safe house was a small apartment above a laundromat in a part of the city that I had never been to. It had 3 rooms and a pull-out couch and a kitchen that was technically a section of the main room, and it smelled like laundry from below, which was oddly comforting. Marcus arrived 20 minutes after us. He sat down at the small table in the kitchen section, and he had a tablet with him, and he was typing fast. The triplets arranged themselves in the way they always arranged themselves in a crisis. Christopher close to Marcus, Colt at the window, Finn near the door. Dorian sat on the floor with his back against the pull-out couch. I sat next to him. He looked at me. I looked at him. We did not say anything. I couldn't, and he didn't need to. But there was something in the sitting next to each other that was its own kind of communication. At 2 in the morning, Marcus looked up from his tablet and said, "They made 4 arrests at the warehouse. Shaw is in custody. There are 12 boys being processed through emergency placement right now." The room went very quiet. Then Colt sat down on the floor. He put his head back against the wall. He said, very quietly, 12. Finn closed his eyes. Christopher stood still for a long moment. Then he sat down next to Colt on the floor. 3 identical faces, arranged in a row on the floor of a safe house above a laundromat, in the middle of the night that ended something they had been working toward for 2 years. And none of them looked triumphant. They just looked tired, relieved in the deep-down way that is not happy, exactly, but is the opposite of bracing for something. I looked at Dorian. He was watching them too. His eyes were very bright. I reached out and tapped his arm. He looked at me. I pointed at him and then at the 3 of them on the floor, and then made a small circular gesture that was the closest I could come to "You are all connected." He looked at that for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "We are." I nodded. I wrote in my notebook, not to show anyone, just because I needed to put it somewhere. This is what safe feels like. I almost forgot. 3 weeks after that Friday night, the investigation had moved into a new phase, what Marcus called the documentation and testimony phase, which meant the federal contact was building the case, and they needed statements from people who had direct experience with Greenfield and with Derek Shaw. Boys who had been moved. Boys who had been targeted. Boys who were, now, in safe placements, being asked if they were willing to talk. I was on that list. Marcus told me in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, with the legal pad in front of him, in the careful way he had always communicated important things to me. "You do not have to. You are not required to give any statement. But if you are willing, what you know about your time at Greenfield, including the clipboard incident, including the car pattern at the warehouse, including Shaw's behavior toward you, could support the cases of 5 other boys who are less able to speak for themselves right now. I read that 3 times. I wrote, how? He wrote, written affidavit. You do not have to speak. You do not have to appear in person. You write it. I witness it. The federal contact receives it. I looked at my notebook. Months of words that I had only written because no one would make me say them out loud. I wrote, I'll do it. The affidavit took 4 days to write. I worked on it at the kitchen table because that was where I felt the most grounded. Sometimes one of the triplets was there, and sometimes none of them were, and sometimes Dorian sat across from me, working on his own things, and we coexisted in the way 2 people coexist when they have found a frequency that does not require words to transmit. On the second day, Christopher sat down across from me while I was working and slid a cup of tea onto the table next to my papers. I did not look up right away. I had been in the middle of describing something that was hard to describe. Not the incident itself, which was factual and took maybe a paragraph, but the texture of the months before it, the way Greenfield had felt like a place that was watching you without looking at you, the way Shaw had a specific kind of attention that went in directions it should not have. When I did look up, Christopher was reading something on his phone, not looking at me, but his other hand was on the table between us, palm up, not reaching, not demanding, just present. I looked at that hand. Then I put my pen down and I set my own hand on top of his. Not holding, just resting. Contact. He did not react dramatically. He did not say anything. He just turned one finger over and tapped the back of my hand once, very gently, the way you would tap something to say, I know. I am here. Keep going. I picked up my pen. I kept going. On the 4th day, I finished it. Marcus read it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he wrote on the legal pad. This is one of the clearest and most complete accounts I have read in 3 years of doing this work. You should know that. I wrote back. It was clear because I had time to think about the words before I used them. That is the advantage of not speaking. He looked at that. He wrote, maybe. Or maybe it is clear because you are someone who pays attention to things other people look past. I folded that page in my notebook too. The hearing, or rather, the federal intake meeting where statements were received, was on a Thursday morning. I went with Marcus and Finn. Christopher would have come, but he had his own meeting with the federal contact separately, related to his work inside the investigation. Colt drove us to the building. The building was gray and official and had the particular smell of buildings where important things happen and are then filed away. A woman named Agent Torres received us in a conference room. She was businesslike and direct, and she did not make me feel observed, which I appreciated. She looked at my affidavit. She asked Marcus 2 clarifying questions. She looked at me. She said, Frederick, on behalf of this office, thank you. This account is going to matter. I held up the notebook. I wrote good. She looked at that, and a corner of her mouth went up. Good, she agreed. Marcus signed things. Torres signed things. Finn waited in the hallway and was drawing in his sketchbook when we came out, and he had drawn the lobby, the potted plant in the corner, the ceiling lights, the security desk, and in the center of the lobby, in the drawing, there was a small figure with a backpack and a notebook who looked, from the sketched angle, like they were standing very straight. He handed it to me. I looked at it for a long time. The figure in the center of the lobby, standing straight, surrounded by an ordinary building doing an ordinary morning. I folded it carefully and put it in my notebook. That evening, all of us were in the kitchen. All 5. Me, the triplets, Dorian. Marcus had gone to bed early, which he had been doing more since the arrest, like the investigation had been holding him up past his natural bedtime for 3 years, and now that it was almost done, his body remembered it was tired. Colt was making grilled cheese, enough for everyone, without asking, and the smell of it filled the kitchen the way only really simple food can, the kind of smell that is connected to being taken care of before you knew the word for it. Finn was drawing at the table. Dorian was reading. Christopher was next to me at the counter, close enough that our arms were almost touching, looking at something on his phone that he eventually showed me. An article about the arrests, for paragraphs, factual, with Shaw's name in the second sentence. I read it. I slid the phone back. He typed, "How does it feel?" I thought about it. I wrote in my notebook, like when you've been holding something really heavy and you finally set it down, but your arms still remember the weight. He read that. He looked at me. He typed, "Yeah." Colt put a plate in front of me. 2 pieces of grilled cheese, perfectly golden, the the crust just right. He put a plate in front of everyone else. He sat down. He picked up his own sandwich. He said, "Okay, eat. We are celebrating." Quietly, because Marcus is asleep. "But we are celebrating." Dorian said, "What are we celebrating exactly?" Colt said, "The fact that we are all sitting in this kitchen. That counts." Nobody argued with that. I looked around the table. Finn drawing between bites of his sandwich. Christopher eating and watching me with his sideways attention. Colt talking to Dorian about something that had turned into a low, easy argument about which kind of cheese was correct for grilled cheese. The light in the kitchen, the same yellow curtains in the window I had noticed on the very first morning. I picked up my pen. I wrote in my notebook, not to show anyone, just for me. I did not know it was going to be like this. I had gotten so good at not expecting anything that I forgot you could still be surprised. Good surprised. The kind that does not make you want to run. A month later, Dorian left for a program. An academic program, the kind you had to apply for. And he had applied before he came back to the Hale house and found out he had gotten in. He told us at breakfast on a Wednesday, matter-of-factly, and then waited for someone to say something. Colt said, "Obviously. We knew you were going to get in." Finn drew a small star in his sketchbook and held it up. Christopher said, "When do you leave?" 3 weeks, Dorian said. He looked at me. I pulled out my notebook. I wrote, "That is good." He read it. He said, "Yeah?" I wrote, "It means you are going somewhere." "That is good." He held the notebook for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he slid it back and said, very quietly, "You should go somewhere too, when you're ready." I wrote, "I know." He nodded. He ate his breakfast. 3 weeks later, on the morning he left, he and I stood in the front hallway while the triplets were loading his bags into Colt's car. He looked at me. I looked at him. He said, "You are going to be okay." I held up my notebook. I had written something on the page already, a whole page, actually, which I had written the night before and been carrying around all morning. It said, "You are the first person I had a conversation with in a long time." Not a real one. Not one where I said something and someone said something back, and it felt like it was going somewhere. Thank you for not talking at me. Thank you for talking with me. I do not have a word for what that meant, but it was big. He read the whole page. His eyes went bright again, the way they had gone bright in the safe house. He said, "Me too." He hugged me. Quick, careful, the kind of hug that is a whole conversation. And then he picked up his bag and walked out the front door. I watched the car until it was gone. Then I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I turned around. Christopher was standing at the end of the hallway, holding 2 mugs of tea. He held one out. I took it. We went to the back porch and sat there in the morning quiet. 2 people in a house that was already reconfiguring itself around the space Dorian had left, the way houses do when someone leaves but does not really leave, because the shape of them stays in the rooms where they existed. Christopher did not type anything. He did not have to. 6 weeks after that. Almost 4 months since the night on the park bench. I had made a decision. I had made it slowly, in the way that real decisions happen, not in a moment, but in a series of moments that were all leaning the same direction until one day you looked at them and realized they had already decided for you. I wrote it in my notebook first. Then I brought it to Marcus. I want to start speaking again. I do not know how to do that. I mean, I know how. My voice works. I have tested it in the shower, but I do not know how to do it in front of people without feeling like I am handing them something they could break. I am asking if there is someone I can talk to. A professional who understands this kind of thing. Marcus read it. He looked at me over his reading glasses. He said, "Yes, I know exactly the right person." The therapist's name was Dr. Avery Cole. He was a slight, unhurried man with wire-rimmed glasses and an office that had too many plants, which I found comforting. He worked, Marcus told me, specifically with youth who had experienced what he called traumatic silencing, which was a term I had never heard, but which fit so exactly that I had to sit with it for a moment before I could write in my notebook. That is what it was. The first session, I did not speak. I wrote. Dr. Cole read. He asked questions by writing back. We talked, in the notebook, on the page, for 45 minutes, and at the end he said, "You are already doing the hardest part. Finding the words. The voice is just the vehicle. You already have the words." I wrote. The words were never the problem. The trusting was the problem. He wrote back, and now? I thought about a kitchen with yellow curtains. A hand on the table, palm up. 3 brothers who learned my silence before my words. A boy who talked to me like I was going to answer. I wrote, Now I am learning that some things are worth the risk of being heard. The first time I spoke out loud, really spoke, in the presence of another person, intentionally, it was 3 months into therapy, on a Tuesday evening in the kitchen of the Hale house. It was only Christopher. The others were out. I had waited, not consciously, but I had waited, and when it was just the two of us and the kitchen light and the leftover quiet of an ordinary evening, I thought, now. He was at the counter. He was making tea. His back was to me. I said, quietly, carefully, like something that had been asleep for a long time and was moving slow, Christopher. He turned around. He did not startle. He did not make it dramatic. He just turned around and looked at me, and his expression did not do anything performative. It just settled, like something that had been slightly out of place had come back to where it belonged. I said, thank you. For the park. For staying. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he said, quietly, thank you for not running. We looked at each other. The kettle clicked. Steam rose. He poured 2 cups of tea. He slid one across the counter to me. He picked up his own. He tilted his head at the back porch, the way he had done dozens of times without words. I picked up my tea. I followed him. Here is what I know now, at the end of this, or at the end of this part, because I have learned that things do not really end, they just change shape. I was a mute Omega who had spent 8 months, 2 weeks, and what eventually became 31 days in a silence I had built from the rubble of every trust one had ever extended and watched break. I believed that the only safe version of myself was the quiet one, the invisible one, the one that did not give anything away that could be taken. And then 3 boys sat on a park bench, and they learned my silence before my words. And somewhere in the learning, something in me started to remember, not that people were safe, because that is not always true, and the world does not owe you safe people just because you need them, but that I was worth the risk of being found. That my voice, when I chose to give it, was mine to give. That choosing to trust is not the same as being reckless with yourself. That the bravest thing I had ever done was not staying silent. It was deciding, finally, to speak. There is a name for what I had been in that world, Omega, which everyone always said like it meant lesser, like it meant last, like it meant the end of something. But Omega is also the last letter of an alphabet, and the last letter is what you reach after you have gone through everything else. After every word has been spoken, and every story has been told, and every voice has had its turn. Maybe that is what I was. Not the beginning, not the most visible, but the last letter, which means the one that finishes things. The one that, when it finally arrives, means the story is complete. You have just carried Frederick's entire journey, from a park bench in tears to a kitchen where one word changed everything. This story was always about the courage it takes to let yourself be found, and you stayed for every word of it. Share this with someone who needs to remember that silence does not mean surrender, and subscribe to this channel, because the next story we tell together will reach even further into everything that makes us human.